being a Central Indiana native. And I guess the path began in earnest when I was a sixth grade student at Hall Elementary School. And I had a retired Marine colonel who was our principal, who was prone to that time at pulling you off to the side, and even as a sixth grader, asking you if you had given any thought to what you wanted to do with your life. Well, I told him I was going to be a Major League Baseball player, and he said, well, I've watched you play softball at recess for the last couple of days, and you're not very good, so you might want to rethink that. So he said, with your obvious love of sports and your inability to keep your mouth shut in class, he said, you might want to think about journalism or broadcasting, and that's a true story. And with that, every project I had in school, everything that I did, I tried to tie to radio and television. My parents bought me a realistic cassette recorder, and I would sit in my living room and watch ball games on the television and call them back. I would make up mock Indy 500 with my friends serving as the drivers of the day.
Wow.
To give you the condensed version, I was able to land a part-time job doing high school sports for a small radio station while I was in high school and in journalism classes. And then started working there right out of high school. I eventually ended up in Terre Haute, Indiana, at a radio station at the time owned by the Holman George family, WTHI Radio. And I was given the opportunity to join the network between 95 and 96. I interviewed with Bob Jenkins, and I joined the network for the second weekend of qualifying for the 96 500. I think I missed Las Vegas later that season. But starting in 1997, I've not missed a race. Started out as a pit reporter, moved to a backstretch and turn announcer, and am now in my fourth year as anchor. I take that back. I missed one a few years ago. I figured I'd better walk my daughter down the aisle, or I'd end up in divorce court. But that was a pretty good reason to miss a race.
Oh, yeah.
But other than that, I've seen them all, brother.
And of course, do you? Okay, real quickly, quick question: do you enjoy booth, pits, turn announcing more? What do you enjoy?
Well, there are times when I miss being out on the course. I mean, some of the views that we have out on the course are spectacular. I mean, we're overlooking the harbor at places like Long Beach and St. Petersburg, and you get a better sense of the fans at places like Mid-Ohio and Texas and Iowa and whatnot. But I think the opportunity to actually conduct the orchestra, if you will, is certainly appealing. I know this. I don't miss dealing with the weather conditions, because now that we've gone road and street course racing for several years, you're out in it. But I will say this, from time to time when the opportunity presents itself, I mean, I stood as the anchor of the network. I stood in the rain 2 years ago and called a very enjoyable lights race at Watkins Glen. So I still, from time to time, because we carry all the Indy Lights shows too as part of our ladder series, but I'll still go out while Nick Yeoman will anchor those shows, and still go out and call a turn every now and then. It's fun to step back into that role from time to time, for sure.
So now that we've got done with getting to know you, we're talking again with Mark Jaynes of the IndyCar Radio. He'll be the play-by-play announcer, chief announcer for the 103rd running of the Indianapolis 500. It'll be on the radio networks the same, but it's moved to NBC. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important for the series to have a television partner that works very, very hard to promote it. I think because everyone wins in that regard. I mean, more sponsors come to the series, which provides, obviously more sponsorship opportunities for the teams. Our drivers get better known, and as a result, when viewership goes up, sponsorship goes up, and we hope the residual to that, trickles down to the radio network in all aspects throughout the series. I think it's important for it to have one home. Technically, I suppose that's still not the case, because it's, the races bounce between NBC and NBCSN, but that's not unlike other forms of motorsports. But certainly, we focus on what we do and how we do it and what we have to offer our listeners. But having an eye on the television contract, I do think from a business perspective for the series, it makes sense to have one partner, I think, for IndyCar, rather than folks being left to wonder, is this an ABC ESPN race or is it an NBC NBCSN race? And I think you look at some of the numbers early on this season, and I think NBC cannot really get a true gauge of what their impact will be until we clear Detroit, because the first part of seasons past kind of, it bounced back and forth between NBCSN and ABC and ESPN. But once we clear Detroit, the rest of the season, I think we'll have a better idea of NBC's impact, because they've had a full quarter season to promote it, and people, will know that those races are NBC or NBCSN races for the rest of the season. And I think they're a patient television partner. I think the series is going to be patient with them, and in 2 to 3 years, we ought to have a better idea series wide in terms of what the impact has been, whether it's been positive or whether the numbers have stayed flat.
We're talking Indianapolis 500 with the NTT IndyCar Series with Mark Jaynes, chief announcer of IMS Radio, the IndyCar Radio. What do you call it now? Is it IndyCar Radio now, or is it still Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network? Do y'all change it for each event, or what?
Well, once we clear the IndyCar Grand Prix,
gotcha.
What I prefer, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network.
There you go.
Until we clear the 500, and then we're right back to being the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network when we get to Detroit.
Okay, cool deal. So one thing for certain, folks, you might be worried, because one of the things I'll tell you, Mark, that I'm kind of disappointed with this whole NBC deal, and I'm not in any way bashing them or any way. Of course, I do things with Fox Sports Radio for my podcast. But what I will say is that I'm disappointed with this NBC Gold deal, where you had an app and they spoiled everybody for so long, Mark. And now it's like, well, if you want to be able to see the practice day coverage from Indy, you've got to pay a bunch of extra money for this NBC Gold app. But that's neither here nor there. That's not even got anything to do with you. But real quickly, talk about the month of May and how it leads up to what is going to be the greatest spectacle on racing this Sunday.
Well, as you alluded to, I mean, I live in Speedway, Indiana. I can walk to the Pagoda in about 15 minutes. This is my 5th year as a Speedway resident, and quite frankly, the energy level starts to build when the calendar turns over to May 1st. I mean, you could start to see the events around Speedway start to increase that are connected to IMS. But then slowly but surely, as we progress through the IndyCar Grand Prix, there are more and more events that occur citywide and almost countywide in Marion County, which is where Indianapolis is located here in the state. And, there's more media paying more attention to things that are going on at the Speedway. And there's, there are parades, there are 5K runs, there are fundraising dinners and events and fashion shows and things of that nature. And it just continues to build. And then, we get through qualifying, which this year, over the 2 days, even though the second day was abbreviated thanks to Mother Nature, it was as compelling as I can ever recall. But our historian, Donald Davidson, said he doesn't ever remember a weekend that was as compelling as this one. And then, we get to Thursday, and a few folks are milling around. It's media day for the drivers. Then, of course, on Friday, several years ago, whoever made the decision to move Carb Day from Thursday to Friday is a genius. I mean, it gets more people in town. It's cheaper for them to do so because they're not here on Thursday, off on Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday. They turn Saturday into Legends Day, where former drivers come back and do a huge autograph session. There's all kinds of activities for families, and of course, the 500 Festival Parade downtown. And then it all, then it culminates in the 103rd running of the Indianapolis 500. It's an incredible atmosphere. And then Monday morning, everyone wakes up and they just take a big sigh of relief and try to reset the button and recharge their batteries for sure. But it's a phenomenal thing to be a part of. It's a privilege, no doubt.
33 drivers will battle it out for 200 laps, 500 miles in the Yard of Bricks, the 2.5-mile event. When it's all said and done, one driver will kiss that Yard of Bricks and, of course, drink the cold bottle of milk. There is just something magical about seeing that in the Indy 500. It's the only race in its existence that's besides, I believe, the Kentucky Derby that's in 100-plus years of being run. And, like I said, I remember watching it as a kid, seeing seen, where it's gone, where it's grown. Where do you see not just the Indianapolis 500, Mark Jaynes, but IndyCar racing itself in the millennial season of 2019?
You're always hoping for growth. You're always looking to not only expand your fan base, but introduce it to a whole new generation of fans. And that's where I see the efforts with the series the past couple of years. And while certainly there has been a huge divide between IndyCar racing and certainly traditional stick and ball sports and other forms of motorsports, while I think IndyCar has experienced some controlled growth, I think we all can agree that some of the other forms of motorsports have come back down to earth a little bit. I won't say that they're not still popular, but there was a zenith there that it reached that I think it might be a ways from at this juncture for a variety of reasons. I think the same could be said, though, of open-wheel racing. I mean, we all remember the 80s and early 90s before the well-documented split. I mean, it was a big part of the public consciousness. Even the casual sports fan had some interest in open-wheel racing, even beyond the Indianapolis 500. So will it ever achieve the kind of relevance that football, basketball, baseball, and even NASCAR does? That remains to be seen. Or will those other sports continue to come back down to earth? I know everything is cyclical, and I think for all intents and purposes, the IndyCar series continues to work hard to grow in popularity. Mainstream, to call it mainstream is a bit of a stretch, I think, but it's an interesting thing because I don't know of any sport in which its marquee event seems to be so separated from the rest of its season. I mean, I know that NASCAR starts with the Daytona 500, and there's a tremendous amount of interest in the Daytona 500.
Right.
And it may be like Indy, the fact that people go to the Daytona 500 and maybe won't watch another stock car race the rest of the year. But there's still that fan base, you know. But in terms of this event, I know for sure there are people that may not even be able to name a driver, but they just want to be here and be a part of it. They live for the spectacle of it. And then, we may not see them the rest of the year. And I've always found that fascinating, how this one event could attract so much interest nationally and internationally, and then really, some of those people, the majority of those people, seemingly don't seem to come back once we get to Detroit for whatever the reason. I guess that just speaks. I mean, it's called the world's greatest race for a reason, and I guess that's one of the reasons why it is just that.
Simon Pagenaud on the pole for the 103rd Indy 500, four-lap average speed of 229.992 miles an hour for Penske Racing's number 22 entry. Ed Carpenter in the middle, Spencer Pigot on the outside of row number one. Three very unique, different drivers on the front row for the Indy 500, would you say, Mark Jaynes?
Yeah, I think Simon Pagenaud, I never believed for a moment that anyone would duplicate the month of May that Will Power put together last year, winning his first 500. But boy, Simon is poised to do just that. I mean, he was very dominant in the IndyCar Grand Prix, and I think he was a surprise pole sitter. He really was. I don't think anybody had their money on Simon Pagenaud, and he just had a very quietly efficient month. And I think he backed it up with some pretty good speeds at the practice session on Monday. Ed Carpenter Racing, a phenomenal accomplishment. Much is always made of the big three in IndyCar, and Andretti Autosport, and Ganassi Racing, and Penske. By the way, Ed has three cars in the Fast Nine, and
awesome.
I think that's a heck of an accomplishment. And Ed himself knows the fast way around that 2.5 mile oval. He's got 4 career poles, 3 of those in Indianapolis, and Ed is a tremendous businessman. He's built a really solid race team, but to do what he's done of late, driving ovals only, I think speaks to the talent and ability of Ed Carpenter. And it appears as though that both Ed Jones and Spencer Pigot are becoming more and more comfortable with their engineers and the crew of the operation at Ed Carpenter. As you know, there's a feeling out process there.
That's right.
But, yeah, any one of those guys winning would be a great story, but it sure seems like that Simon Pagenaud has the jaw locked as we get ready for the 103rd running for sure.
Want to go into 3 different topics all at one time. James Hinchcliffe, first off, getting